Welcome to another episode of Leadership Lessons. My guest today is Alan Dodson, and we're going to talk about a difficult subject, but an important one: the subject of ministering into grief. Alan, thank you for your friendship, and thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Good to be with you, Brother Todd. Appreciate the opportunity.
Let me tell you more about Alan. Alan Dodson is the founder of the Andrew Dodson Go Get 'Em Foundation, formed in honor of his late son, Andrew. Alan has served as senior pastor in Kentucky Baptist churches, including Hazard First Baptist and Cornerstone in Lexington. He also was a founding member of the first KBC regional consultant team and served effectively in that role for many years before transitioning to other ministries. He's married to Amy. They have two sons, Alistair, who is a student at Clear Creek, and Andrew, who passed last year. So, Alan, let's just jump right into these questions. We're going to talk about the work of the foundation shortly. But first, let's talk about why it was formed. Just please walk us through the events of this past year for you and your family.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. So most people around the state heard the story of Andrew. It was statewide, really nationwide news. Andrew was injured in his spring inter-team football game. They call it the Maroon and White game at Pulaski County High School, and passed away from blunt force trauma, terrible brain injury. And, right after Andrew's passing, Brother Todd, we had so many generous and kind people that wanted to make memorial gifts to honor Andrew. And so we thought long and hard about how do we direct those gifts. Andrew lived an incredible life in 17 years. Andrew was one of these kids that was sort of the all-American high school kid. He was into everything, enjoyed travels, enjoyed sports, enjoyed academics. Andrew didn't let an opportunity pass him by. He was just not an idle kid. He stayed busy, and we wanted to do something that would really honor his memory and his legacy. And we sat down together as an extended family and thought about all of our experiences with young people. I coached in my spare time, youth football over the years. My wife's an educator. My sibling is an educator. All of our extended families are pretty much in education. And so we know that kids have a tough time out there getting sometimes just enough money to pay a league fee, or to go on a school trip or engage in a mission trip with their church. And so we believe we were led to establish a foundation that would help the young people in Pulaski County get to experience life the way Andrew did. So if they need a league fee, again, school trip, any of those things, we have a brief application process, and we help young people in our county experience educational and spiritual opportunities.
Alan, for you and Amy, with Andrew's passing, every parent's worst nightmare is exactly what you all have experienced and what you've been walking through. What is your experience in this since Andrew's passing? What has it taught you about grief that maybe you didn't understand as personally before as you do now?
We have lived actually through a season of grief. Todd, you know my family, and back in 2020, my father passed away, and very soon after that, my father-in-law passed away, and then less than 3 years later, we had this with Andrew. But when you walk through things with senior adult parents, that's sort of the process of life. You might be surprised, but at the same time you expect it. Grieving the loss of a child, you've heard it so many times before, that it's the most profound grief that you can experience, and that certainly has been the case with us. The profound nature of it, unexpected. We became empty nesters overnight. Our older son is in college, and he's involved in ministry on the weekends, so he doesn't come home very much. So for all intents and purposes, we went from life in the fast lane, so to speak, with our children always involved in activities to a screeching halt. Um, so the loss of Andrew, and then the complete loss of a way of life, I guess,
Yeah.
has made it very, very profound grief. Um, I've learned that, grief is very personal.
Mm-hmm.
There's similarities, but grief is almost like your fingerprint,
Hmm.
and we all go through grief in different ways. I've learned that grief really ought to be embraced, but at the same time, you have to control it.
Yeah.
Grief is a gift from God. We're fearfully and wonderfully made,
Mm-hmm.
and that includes our emotions. And so God has given grief as a way to let things out, but at the same time, I've had to learn how to properly control that.
Alan, I appreciate you saying that grief is very personal. That I think that makes a lot of sense, and that should help people. You know, sometimes folks want us to grieve in a certain way or to grieve in a certain time frame, but saying that it's personal, I think makes a lot of sense. You know, God uses everything to shape us, to sanctify us, the great experiences of life as well as the most challenging ones. How has this experience with grief and Andrew's passing, and you've shared how it's changed your lifestyle, um, ha, what change do you see in yourself personally through this time?
Yeah, so Todd, I would say that this experience hasn't changed me,
Mm-hmm.
but it's changing me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still pretty fresh.
Yeah.
We're 10 months out
Wow.
from Andrew's passing. And, every day I'm learning new things about this new journey. It's a journey we've never been on before. And it's just like going to a new place. You're seeing new sights and having new experiences, and every day is a little bit different. I'm learning, as much as anything, how to relish the moments with my family and friends. I think we take a lot of things for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And an experience like this, when you bury the beautiful body of a 17-year-old boy,
Yeah.
You learn very quickly that you ought not take anything for granted. I'm learning how to lean into good memories.
Hmm.
There's an old statement that has been attributed to Dr. Seuss, although I found out that really Dr. Seuss didn't say it, but it's attributed to him a lot. It goes sort of like this: don't cry because it's over, but smile because it happened.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that the first part of that has all that much value, because you're going to cry.
Yeah. Sure.
So you do cry and you do grieve the loss, but I am learning how, Todd, to smile through the tears.
Yeah.
I already said Andrew lived a full life, and obviously at his age, I got to experience a whole lot of that with him. The trials and the triumphs, and I'm learning more and more every day how to relive those things, and learning how to be thankful
Yeah.
that God gave me the incredible experience of being the father of an incredible son.
Alan, everything about Andrew, I was only probably around him once or twice, and that was probably just in passing. He was probably doing something else, but I've watched him grow up through your, social media, through things that you would post, and then at his service in his honor, things that people said. Andrew seemed like that kid that was absolutely full of life. He was involved in everything. He wasn't just involved in sports, but he was also involved in academic things in school. He loved to travel. I heard you say that about him. But he also seemed like that kid that would make you laugh, whether you wanted to laugh or not. Probably hard to discipline him because you were getting tickled at him at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew was the life of the party. When
Yeah.
Andrew walked in a room, and I don't say it, trying to aggrandize him in any stretch, but he was a very handsome young man.
Yeah.
He was the epitome of what you talk about in the all-American teenage boy. He was tall, he was dark, he was handsome, he was witty, he was athletic, he was smart. Andrew was the whole package, and he was just one of those persons that to know him was to love him. And you know, that's the, that gives you a lot of good memories.
Yep.
Go back to what I said earlier. So you have to learn how to smile through the tears. And you know, Todd, I have through this experience finally developed a life. I didn't develop, but I've claimed a life verse. You know, down through your Christian walk, people will ask you that. What's your life verse? I've never really had a life verse. I've had a favorite text.
Yep.
Philippians 2:9-11 that holds up Jesus. That's always been my favorite text, but without question, 2 Corinthians 12:19 is now my life verse. You know the context. Paul prayed for the thorn to be removed. God chose not to remove it, but Paul learned a lot about God's grace.
Yeah.
Because through the no, God said to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. And that's where my life is. That's where Amy and Alistair's lives are right now. We put one foot in front of the other day by day because the Lord's strength is made perfect in our weakness. So I'm learning more about God's grace
And Alan,
on a daily basis.
I would guess also the people that just come to you and tell you stories, and you know some of the stories I heard just about people that Andrew cared about and ministered to him. He was a follower of Jesus, and obviously none of us are perfect. We all have shortcomings, but he seemed to care about people, not a certain group of people, the popular people or whatever, but he just seemed to care about people. And I know when you hear those stories of acts of kindness, ways that Andrew served and helped others, you have the recording of a testimony I know that came out of camp that we've been able to watch. That must be incredibly meaningful to you and Amy and your family now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, part of the learning experience through all this is learning how to rely more and more on the Holy Spirit. You know, Jesus promised that he would be our comforter. And he's certainly been that. Todd, can I remark just briefly on that testimony? Back last summer when things were even fresher than they are and a little more raw than they are right now, I went through a series of days where I was so afraid that I was forgetting the sound of his voice.
Yeah.
You know, we have great pictures of Andrew. One of the blessings of God is for the last going on 3 years, he had dated this beautiful young lady whose mother was a professional photographer, a very high level photographer.
Yeah.
And so because of that, we have just all kinds of wonderful pictures of Andrew. So we have those, but I was just afraid I was going to just forget the sound of his normal everyday voice. And I prayed about that. Yeah. I said, Lord, don't let me forget his voice. And it was in the midst of that intense time where I believe the Holy Spirit helped me remember that just the summer before that, he had come back from camp and had shared his testimony at our home church. And I was sitting there one night in the middle of all that. And I thought, well, I'm just going to look back and see if that's still on YouTube. And I went back, and sure enough, there it was.
My goodness. What a gift.
So what a comfort, you know, and I do, without question, I was praying that, Lord, just let me remember his voice. You know, he didn't leave voicemail. He texted like kids do, and God brought that to my memory.
Alan,
so we're so thankful.
You're not only a father, and you and Amy going through an incredible grief. You're also you've been a pastor. You are serving as the interim pastor now. What's your advice to someone who is walking through a deep season of grief now?
Well, I would say several things. First of all, I would say embrace it. Embrace your grief. Don't try to run from it. Don't try to hide. Realize that at some level, you will work through a cycle. Todd, back in seminary, we studied the whole Kubler-Ross model,
Mm-hmm.
where people work through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Kubler-Ross said she was a Christian, and I think there is a framework to understand that through the lens of Scripture and Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big thing is to keep you from settling into depression. You have to be real with your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that means you have to get away.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to go out in the middle of nowhere and scream. I've done that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to be very raw and let it all out. And you have to dig deep into Scripture and theology.
Yeah.
So many things you have to recount. The psalmist wrote in Psalm 116 that precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. That means that God, attends to that very, very closely. In the New Testament, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13, Paul writes and he tells us about what's coming for the life of the child of God, so that we do not grieve as those who have no hope. Yeah. And then you remember things like Jesus told the thief on the cross in Luke chapter 23 that today you'll be with me in paradise.
Yeah.
So you have to dig deep into Scripture and theology, and then don't be afraid to call out to someone who can help you. Todd, you also know that back in October, I experienced a very traumatic thing. I was over in Israel when the war started, and I didn't realize how traumatizing that was for me until I got back. And I have to tell you, probably about a week into December, with that experience and being raw from the loss of Andrew, I hit a wall.
Yeah.
I just did. And I'm fortunate, because of what the Lord has done in my life. I have good people around me. I have people that I can call on a moment's notice and receive good counsel from. But I had to reach out to one of those people who is specifically trained in biblical counseling, and I leaned into him. He helped me through that.
Yeah.
So you have to use those godly resources that the Lord puts into your life.
Alan, you've just helped a lot of people right there. Know that it's certainly okay to hurt. You're going to hurt, and you need to own it. And it's okay to ask for help and talk to people who, when you open up and have that conversation, you realize this guy knows some things I don't know, and he may actually, God may use him to help and strengthen me. Along with what you've mentioned, were there any particular resources or books that you have found helpful? Anything that you've been able to hear anybody else's story or experience that has been meaningful to you?
Yeah, Todd, yes and no.
Okay.
I'll start with the no.
Okay.
And I'd love to be able to give you a long list of written resources that are helpful to parents who have lost, underage children.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, there's not a lot of good help out there, honestly.
Yeah.
I have found one, and I have it right here. Nicholas Wolterstorff wrote this book that's entitled Lament for a Son.
Would you hold that up again just for a second, Alan?
Yeah, glad to.
Lament for a Son. Thank you.
And it is particularly helpful. Actually, he had me in the preface. As I read the preface, I got down to these words. Let me just read it very quickly. He said about his experience that his wound was no longer raw, but it has not disappeared. And he says that is as it should be. Yeah. He was worth loving, therefore he's worth grieving over.
My goodness.
Talking about his son.
Yep.
So he sort of had me at that. And that is a singular resource. And again, it's Lament for a Son, Nicholas Wolterstorff. It's a different last name, but you'll find it on Amazon, different resources. But that one's been helpful. Other than that, at this point, I really haven't. I've looked at a lot of different things, but I haven't been personally ministered to by many written resources.
Okay.
Um, the resource that's been most helpful to me is that I have been able to network, particularly with other fathers
Yeah.
who have lost sons, and even more particularly, fathers who have lost athlete sons.
Okay. Wow.
There's a young man up in northern Kentucky, Matt Mangine Jr. It's a very public thing, so I can call the name. But his father, Matt Mangine the second, reached out to me because his son was the last son or the last teenage boy to pass away in Kentucky during an athletic event before Andrew.
Wow.
And so, in fact, he and I will meet for lunch this Friday.
Wow.
And so, and he had already formed a network, more of a national network, and we meet ever so often on Zoom, other fathers that are walking through this type of grief. No one can help you the way that someone who has experienced what you're experiencing can.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's why I think, again, this book is so helpful because it's written from the perspective of a father that lost a young son, and then the network with other fathers that I've been blessed to tap into.
Alan, this platform is called Leadership Lessons, and so we're all the time trying to think about pastors and church leaders, those in ministry who will help other people. What's your advice to church leaders as they help church members walk through tremendous loss? I mean, you've done that yourself as a pastor for years, and you still do. On the other side of the passing of Andrew, has that advice changed? Is it different? What would you say now?
Yeah, I would say one thing the loudest, and it's something I think that we all know, but we need to be reminded of it. Ministry of presence is more important than ministry of word. You know, I think about the three friends of Job. I chuckle because I heard a preacher one time call them the three musketeers of misery. And you know, they showed up and they were just there, and they did a really good thing for Job until they started talking.
That's right.
You know, they spent 7 days and didn't say a word. They were just there with Job. And then when they tried to start figuring things out for Job, that's where the train left the track, so to speak. So ministry of presence is important. You know, I go back to those days of Andrew's visitation and funeral. Of course, that was an unusual situation. I mean, it was so widely reported, and Andrew was so well loved in our community that, of course, we had to have his services at the largest venue in town. Mm-hmm. There were somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 people that came to his visitation, about 1,500 to his funeral. So it was hard for people to get near us. Mm-hmm. The people that came to his visitation, a lot of them waited in line. I want you to listen to this, for over 3 hours just to see Alistair and Amy and me. But I promise you, I can remember each person that did.
Wow.
Just the presence. So many of them said, you know, Alan, I don't have any words, but I just want you to know that I love you, that we're here to support you. So ministry of presence is important. And I want to be very careful, Todd, because everyone has good intentions. Mm-hmm. If you try to say something, that means you have a good intention to try to help the person. But I would say just a few more things very quickly. Never try to make comparisons. Mm-hmm. So I had one pastor that called me, and he tried to compare my grief to the loss of his father. And I just had to say to him, brother, I appreciate what you're saying, but you just need to know I lost my dad too, just 3 years ago, and there's no comparison here.
Right.
And I wasn't being rude.
No.
You know, I thanked him for his call. But when you're ministering to people going through this type of profound grief, it does not help to try to make a comparison. Don't try to advise. Listen. You know, obviously, if somebody is going to do something unspiritual or unbiblical, I think it's the Christian thing to give them advice. But outside of that, don't advise. I'll just say what I heard my sister recently say. We're a very close knit family.
Mm-hmm.
And so her kids are like my kids are like her kids. And she said, you know, until you've buried the body of a beautiful 17-year-old boy, don't try to tell me what you would do.
Yeah.
So be very careful to not advise unless you're correcting someone biblically.
Yeah.
You know, don't make trivial statements. And it's just, here's the bottom line. It's never wrong to say, I love you and I'm praying for you and I mean it.
Yeah.
And I get it. Look, don't try to make up words for something where there just really aren't any words.
Mm.
No. But I would go back to ministry of presence. You know, I have had people, and again, I thank God for everything that everybody has done for us, and I want to be very clear about that. But I have had people to come and say, you know, I wanted to come, but I just didn't know what to say. I would just say this to you: don't let a lack of words keep you from going and being there.
That's helpful, Alan. That's so helpful. Everything you've shared is so helpful. I'm sorry for the pain that you and Amy have been through to have these deep lessons imprinted on your heart and your mind. You're permanently impacted by this, but what you're sharing, I know, will help other people. Let's take the rest of our time to talk about the Go Get 'Em Foundation. So, explain. You've shared a little bit about it, but tell us about the name and why. I think you've told us why you formed it, to use it to help other student athletes, predominantly, or maybe not other students. But tell us about the name and why the name.
Yeah, so students in general, they don't have to be involved in athletics. So Go Get 'Em has always been my mantra with my boys. You know, if they were preparing for a test, I would say to them, you know, you've studied all you can. Now go to school, take that test, go get them. Mm-hmm. When it's time to play a game, you practice, you've done your best, now go get them. So my boys were very accustomed to hearing that from me. On March 31st, the day of the maroon and white game, Todd, I was actually down in South Alabama. I was speaking there the next morning, and I was in a coffee shop reflecting on notes for the next day, and I got a text from Andrew at 3:57 in the afternoon that simply said, we're going out on the field to warm up, and that's what I texted him back. Yeah. So my last communication with Andrew on earth was that mantra, go get them. Yeah. And so when we named the foundation, it was pretty obvious to us, go get them. And that's what we want. We want kids to have an opportunity to go get them in life. Again, if they need help with a league fee, if they need help with a school trip, a mission trip at church. And then another thing we're doing, Todd, with the foundation is we want to use it as a platform to advocate for safety initiatives in youth sports because of the nature of Andrew's injury. Yeah. So go get them. It's all about, you know, seizing the day. You only get to be young once. Not everybody is as privileged as my boys have been. Not that we're wealthy, you understand, but they did have a lot of good opportunities. A lot of kids don't. And we want to help the kids in our community get to experience life the way Andrew did.
So, Alan, for the student, you're trying to help students have every opportunity to just enjoy so much of life to the fullest. To the grown-ups, I think I hear you saying that it might be our role to step up and provide the protection and the care that those students and resources those students need. If folks want to know more about the Go Get 'Em Foundation or donate to it, how would they find out more?
Yeah, so we have a web page. It's not a fully developed website yet, but it's a web page. Go Get 'Em, GOGETEM, 80, the number 80.com. 80 was Andrew's jersey number. So gogetem80.com. If you go there, you'll see the mission statement for the foundation, portals and avenues if the Lord leads you to give to that. It's nonprofit. Nobody in the organization, we did it right. We set up a board of trustees, and there's no profit distributed to anybody in the organization. It goes straight to help kids.
And Alan, so take a minute to brag on your community, how the community has responded and cared for you and your family. You shared some of that with the outpouring at the funeral and the visitation, but share a little more. And then I think this last weekend, I saw that you all had a celebration of Andrew's life. Chick-fil-A partnered with you in that.
Yeah, so I think that's as good of a place to start there as anything, Todd. So Andrew's birthday, his 18th birthday, was this past Saturday, January 27th. Yeah. So the operator, the owner of the local Chick-fil-A in Somerset, has become a good friend to our family. And Chick-fil-A was sort of his hangout. He had a lot of friends. He didn't work there. He lifeguarded in the summer, but he hung out there. He and his girlfriend went there a lot. He and his buddies went there a lot. They all knew Andrew. And so the owner there reached out to us and said, can we partner with you for his birthday? So the whole day, from opening at 6:30 to closing at 10 p.m., they celebrated Andrew's birthday. Anybody that mentioned Andrew's name or the Go Get 'Em Foundation, they donated a portion, a percentage of that purchase back to the foundation. So that is, just one recent thing. Yep. That is indicative of the love of our community in Somerset and Pulaski County. I was in a meeting the last night, and I had a guy who came up to me, and he said, Alan, I just want to tell you about my last encounter with Andrew. And I didn't even know that he really had any encounters with Andrew, but he just shared with me how pleasant Andrew was to him, how mature he was, asking about his life and those kinds of things. You touched on that earlier. Andrew just had a way with people. And so even last night, I heard from a brand new person, just a little testimony about him. And so honestly, our community at large could not have been more supportive and continue to be more supportive than our community is.
Well, folks love you. Alan, take a minute. You're in ministry leadership, and think about that guy, that pastor possibly, who he has to lead a church, he has to keep working, and yet he's going through a profound grief or loss himself. What do you say to that leader, that ministry leader, who is trying to serve others while at the same time walk through their own grief?
So own your emotional margin. You mentioned earlier, Todd, I'm doing an interim pastorate right now, and it's unique that I had two churches to reach out to me within a 24-hour period to ask about my availability to do an interim right now. And honestly, I was led to choose one over the other because one of them was going to take a little less emotional energy. If that makes sense. Yep. I think that would resonate with a pastor. So know where your limits are. Know what you can and can't do. And I would say that there has to be that level of self-awareness and self-respect so that you're able to say no when you have to say no, when you just have to get away. You just do that because, this thing is going to be a season as far as the intense rawness of it, but you want to successfully navigate the season so that when the next season comes along, you're fit for it.
Yeah. Alan, thank you so much. We're so sorry for the great loss in your family. We're grateful for Andrew's life. We're sorry for you and Amy and Alistair and all of your family, but also at the same time thankful for your willingness to talk openly about your experience as a way of helping others. Thank you for this time. Thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Well, thank you, brother. We're going to write a book.
Good. Well, I'm thinking all the way through. You need to. You're going to have to put all this down in writing. You have an experience that no one wants to go through, but you'll help equip hundreds and thousands of others in their ministry.
Well, that's our prayer, is that God will be glorified by this tragedy, and He is. I think a lot of people have come to Christ because of it. Families have re-engaged with their churches because of it, and then if we can add another layer and help people going through grief, I think God will give us the wherewithal to do that. That's what we want to do.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for taking the time today.